Dropping frames left and right. Uh-oh. Says it's going, but here we go. All right. Blah 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 blah. Blah 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 blah. What's up? What's up? Boo, 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 boo. What is this? Members only live stream. Oh, yeah, that's not gonna work. I think I've got like one member. That's okay. Yeah. What is this? Why is this box like way over here? I wonder if this thing had a split. Oh, it did have a split. Shoot, everything's off. Yeah, that happens. Oh gosh. Well, I'll just clear it out. I'll just do it again. I'm not going to try to mess with it. You know, sometimes when a stock split happens, the chart actually it does ask you to it does ask you to if you want to move all your stuff. But yeah, for some reason here it's not doing that. So let's go to 35. Okay. Ramp it up. Let it go. Only members. Oh, I was just reading something. It was like a notification. That's all. Don't worry about it. Nothing to do with stocks, so. Let's see. I mean, this doesn't look too bad. I was been asked to do this chart several times by, I think Jason, and I think I've done it before, but it's split since then, I guess. Well, it couldn't have been then because that's like a long time ago. I don't know. It must have been a while. I'm not sure. This is a. Kind of already went and met that, didn't it? So that walk down right there. So from a multi-year perspective, this could be a middle. One of these two markers where it backed up. This is January 2026. That could fall in line with kind of a Santa rally. But this is also not a guarantee it's even going to go up. It's just there. I'm going to kind of knock this out quick because if he comes on and asks me about it, I want to have the chart ready. We'll talk about AMC and GME a bit in a minute. I'm thinking that on the whole, I think this is the one, Tantech Holdings. This is the one he asked me about. I'm thinking on the whole that today be pretty chill and we'll just kind of stream until my internet craps out, which is always what's going to happen at some point. I don't know, guys. I can't fix it. And I'm not making an excuse. I literally just can't. I tried to fix it. It just doesn't work. Sometimes we have really strong connection for several hours, and then sometimes it's like just terrible. Last time we did it, it was awful, 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 awful. I did record a video, so if there's a really early outage today, I will just post the video that I recorded for AMC. The the sort of the big picture is really straightforward, or I would say it's pretty simple. There's not really much to too much to talk about. Yeah, I mean, this is just one of those things that I'd have to look at, see what's going on behind the scenes here. This looks like it could have a pretty nasty drop if it doesn't break out. So if this thing gets above $2, there's a good chance it could run to 3, maybe 4. And then if you look at the previous bottom here, it hasn't come back and checked this bottom yet. So I do find this area around January to be kind of likely. But that being said, we just saw this happen on another ticker that people probably been following a bit, which is Beyond Meat, which got this meme stock rally and it ran like 1,400%. I just traded it down off the top yesterday from $7 down to $2.60. Made a decent chunk of change on that pullback. The reason that I did that is because it's not my meme stock. I'm not in it. I wasn't in it on the run up. Weirdly, you guys might remember this. If you're with me, if you've been with me for a while, or if you're on the Discord, you may remember that I actually thought this was a pretty decent buy back here when it was like $2, and I thought it was going to go. I kid you not. Believe whatever you want to believe, I guess. But I thought it could potentially run up to $6 or $7. So it's weird because I remember it did have a pretty good rally. This is when I was really interested in it, was back here. It did have a pretty good rally up to like 5. I got out somewhere, I bought in like down here, and I got out somewhere around like 3 or something. So I had traded this back here up, and then that was kind of the end of it for me. I didn't look at it again, and I didn't catch the top. I just kind of traded it. I got about $1 move out of it, and then I just was like, all right, well, it doesn't look like it's going to keep running for me. So I was like, I guess I'll just be done with it for now and see what happens later. And then when it dropped to 50 cents, one of the guys in our trading group, Momo, he was like, hey, it's at 65 cents. It looks like it's going to run to $1. And I said, and I quote, I was like, if it comes back to 50 cents, I'll probably buy it. But I'm not going to jump in right now because I don't know if this has actually hit bottom yet. And the thing is like it hadn't quite built out enough for me to be convinced. And you might say, well, looking back on it, you might say, well, it was crossing up here on the 4 hour. Obviously, it was going to run. No, not true. And this had crossed up on the 4 hour before. It really was in some ways like a true short squeeze. I think there was a lot of momentum behind it all of a sudden from the retail community and the meme trading community. And I think that weirdly, again, like looking back at this, I just find it to be one of the strangest cases of like, let's just say like trajectory completion. Something like this happened recently on AVGO, I think, Broadcom, where it just went like the complete opposite way to start. And then all of a sudden it just goes back up and it hits the target. And I had done this Broadcom trade, which is, I think, again, AVGO. And I was like, I think it's going to hit this target. And then it goes the opposite direction on like a Trump tweet. And it dumps like completely the other way, like almost, complete loss. And then it just reverses and goes all the way back up and hits the target. And I was like, what's in the water in this market sometimes is really disturbing. It's like, even the good TA, it's there, and it's weird that it went back up. But I find this to be particularly similar to that because it's really, really similar that this had this kind of drive, like it was going to come back up and retest this floor up here around $6, $7. You can see the mark from way back. This place where there was a heavy amount of shares traded for a long period of time. I want to say like 2 years back here. It was a long time, this range. And everything here is like pointing back to the upside. I mean, you can go back and just look at these trajectories. Like they're getting steeper as you're going down. And it's just wild to me that as it's doing this, there's this bankruptcy story and all this other stuff. And even right here, like going to the hook, you can just see the acceleration and this is just one of those things where it's like, does this happen every time? No, it really doesn't. I think that there's a lot of times where I'd be like, yeah, this might come back up and retest $3 or $2 at some point. But once it's down at 50 cents and you've really got this nasty sell off because you're like, yeah, they're going to dilute the stock. I mean, that's still there. That hasn't changed anything. The dilution here is going to be monumentally huge. But what I would say, and this is really interesting, is we were following this as a kind of a case study for what may occur on AMC. This idea that when they announce this dilution, and guys, it's not insignificant. Like Beyond Meat's dilution is going to be huge, like huge. It's going to cut the value. If it was $2, it was going to cut it into like a third. I mean, it's only got like a 70 million float or something, and they're going to add like 330 million shares. I mean, you're talking about like 4 times the amount, or not, if not more. And so it's like the idea of this being cut into a quarter, going from like $2 to 50 cents, it is logical, but then it's completely illogical. And then why come back up? There is maybe another story here of like operators who may have been long on the stock that weren't prepared for this kind of a drop. And yeah, it's possible that there is a kind of fabricated short squeeze here to get you back up and unload. Who knows? If I'm an operator and I'm buying this looking for that turnaround, and I think this is a good trade, I'm in an institutional long, and I've been accumulating shares from 7 down to 2, and then it drops to 50 cents. Yeah, I mean, you could sell some of that for a loss, but this kind of works in your favor too. So I'm not saying it's all retail, but it is an interesting case study. And I think that when you look at the big picture here, like this is not a justified move in the sense of what happened, right? Because, I mean, if you look at the stock, it's going to dilute. It's just destined to, it should be reducing value. And historically, even if it were valued at like $10, you're 4Xing that thing, it's going to be dropping significantly. So it really doesn't matter that this was only at like 3. It could have been any number if they had announced that. So it's fascinating to me because I think of it as like a little bit of a case study, because we had talked about AMC when they announced that they were maybe going to drop 550 million shares on it. And you're like, well, what the heck, dude? That's like half the price. AMC's at 280, guys. And this stock right here, this was sitting around 280, 290 when this thing started plummeting, goes to 50 cents, and then it runs all the way up to $9. Now, I'm not saying that AMC is going to do the same thing. That's not what I'm saying. But when you think about maybe the reasoning for some of these bigger sell-offs and maybe ultimately these short squeeze moments, how they come about, it may be a little bit more planned than people expect. And I think there's maybe the anticipation that retail will buy it up, plays into some of that. Not sure. Do I think that this is going to keep squeezing? Yes and no. I don't mean that in a wishy-washy way. Like I don't know the future, obviously, on this. But the reason I think it's a yes and a no is because during these giant moments, there was a short interest kind of account on here, and it's predicted that it's not really changed as much as expected, because a lot of times shorts will kind of pile right back in when it goes right back up. And that's expected. And then you also have a huge amount of volume in this top right here. That's a huge amount of volume. So it should not surprise anybody that volume would be both buyers and sellers. Okay? That volume, if you look at the second half of this move, divide it into 2 parts. Think about it this way, effort, right? Look at the amount of volume it took to move the first 50%. And then think about the amount of volume it took to move the second 50%. It's like eclipsing it totally, And that can only be attributed to sellers. Like, that's it. You cannot say that that was just buyers by pushing it up the second half or whatever. No, like percentage-wise, it would have needed the same amount of volume as the first, unless what? Unless you have a lot of sellers and you need a lot more volume. So typically, like when you see stuff like that, I wouldn't say it's a red flag, but I would then expect there to be a turnaround. And I did catch the top quite nicely. It's like catching a knife. It's not really something I would try to do most of the time. But hey, when it works, it works. And I'll tell you what I did. And you're probably going to think it's funny, but I actually looked at this and I thought that it looked like cat ears, which is, again, you're like, that's not funny. That's just all you do. And I'm like, yeah, but it's interesting because if you look at this as a kind of like a 1, 2, 3, it almost doesn't make any sense. Like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's kind of like sloppy. It really just goes up to here, drops back, and then almost goes parabolic. It turns into like a curve. But I noticed that curve, and that curve to me is really significant. Anytime there's like a parabolic motion like that and the end appears, it's going to pull back pretty hard because they left the trend behind, right? So the lower trend here, I've got it on probably regular trading hours, so this looks wrong. The lower trend here is like really low. But even this, it had like come way off the trend. So I'm looking at this like it's probably going to do a pullback. And then you look at the RSI, and it's kind of like that cat ear top. I know it sounds weird, but it does look like that to me. So even though I don't see it very easily right here, I can see it here. I'm like, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. You guys are like, that's a little bit crazy, isn't it? Yeah, it is. But the thing is like, this is typically where that appears. It appears in this kind of curvature motion. So I'm sort of attuned to looking for that motion and seeing that kind of blocky look, that flat look to it. So you believe it or not, I actually got in right here like 7 to 750. I bought some puts and they did okay. They weren't like they weren't going to the moon, so to speak. They took them a long time. They weren't even profitable until it dropped down to like almost 250 to 3 area down here. So pretty much the entire first half of this move, they just sat flat. People didn't believe it was going to go down probably. But the retracement here, the 50% retracement's at $2. So, I mean, you have to think about this as like just one big move. This is a huge move. And ultimately, moving averages, basic Fibonacci retracements, it's kind of the Occam's razor thing. Usually the simplest answer is the right answer. And this level right here at 280 is a support, but it's this is like I think it's a 386 level. So when it hit that level yesterday, I was like, it's probably going to bounce. It might hold as a support for now. This is where bulls could have a chance to start a second kind of a squeeze. And I see that as a decent chance. When you're in this mode, and it's going to be like this probably, you're going to see these massive swings. It's great if you want to play the volatility. Just be really cautious, because at this point, there's only one of two options, right? So one is that this is going to be a bearish retracement, in which case you're going to have a retracement this direction, and you can draw the fibs down. And you can see that if that were the case, it's possible this could come back up to like 4. The 0.5 here is 470, and then the 618 is 553. And I've got those markers on here because they go back to previous times, and they're pretty reliable. These are historic levels. So they've situated, let me just put it this way. If you don't want to, I don't know, because like a lot of times we think fibs are kind of arbitrary, but they're not. Right now, this bounce is situated so that those bearish retracements actually land on these historic supply-demand zones. So like it's perfectly situated to retrace back to these levels where you could have a pretty strong rejection. So in the meantime, you're kind of like, well, the reaction there could be pretty strong. You're still moving from like 350 back up to 5. I mean, that's a big move, but it's not necessarily going to be bullish, right? We don't know what happens if it holds this and pushes up. I couldn't tell you, is it going to continue? I'm doubtful, but at the same time, it would make sense if there's going to be a big correction here to have a bit of a B leg, right? Like an A, B, and then a C, and that's pretty typical. At least that 3 points. So if it were going to go back up, would it make sense to hit here or hit here? Sure. Possibility that it goes nowhere near there and it kind of heads lower. Well, yeah, there were other fibs that were weaker. Once it's out of the downtrend here, which it's currently, I think, out of, or it's very close to it, it may not be out of these 2 wicks. It looks like it's not quite there yet. Yeah, it's got some room. So it could, if it had like a sudden burst, it could move up to like 450 or something. But if it doesn't get out of here, then I don't know why you would think it's going to run. So it's kind of like between then and now, you're kind of just playing with fire. You could try to catch the bottom, see if it reacts up. But ultimately, you're going to have a lot of people that when this sold down, that didn't get out. So you have to think about both sides. And this was up 1,400%. Right? And then it dropped like half of its value almost. So for the buyers who were in it just for the squeeze play, they're going to be waiting to see if there's a rebound to get out again. They're not necessarily all going to be like meme level traders where they're trying to run it back up again, right? And remember, the second half of this included a huge amount of sellers. So it's really important to note, because if you're buying in and you're buying in during the second half, you're buying into selling power, which is why there's so much more volume on the second half of this move than the first half. First half may have actually been a lot of shorts covering. It doesn't take that much buy volume to kind of push those shorts into stop losses, so to speak. And you see those kind of quick moves up. A lot of that's short covering because they're triggering, from back here when their entries are. And so I'm not of the opinion that it couldn't go farther. I just think you got to be really cautious. So like a 50% retrace here would go back to 2, and that's a pretty deep move, I think the 786 or the 618 was down here at like 130. I had marked it off. So again, totally normal. When AMC had a huge move, and that ended up being really strong because it went again. Right? It didn't stop there. But we got to remember, even during that, the very first pullback that AMC had was like a 786. It went really low. It was a huge pullback. It went all the way back to what would have been considered like the main creek. And we've got plenty of evidence that could be quite low here. You look at this last trend there, it's pretty low. So I would not be surprised if this came back to like a $1.50 in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not over either, and there's still like secondary motion here that happens. But I think this secondary motion, if it doesn't go as far and then it comes back, I think it's going to drop pretty hard. I would imagine that if this pushes up and fails to advance back above 5 area, it's probably going to be a pretty nasty slide back down. That's my opinion, okay? That doesn't mean I'm going to nail it. That doesn't mean I'm right. But that's what I would suggest, is that you're probably going to have a lot more sellers in this push-up. I'm doubtful that, it's just going to be this constant squeeze and just keep going. But I've been wrong about that kind of stuff before, The fanatics in some of these charts, sometimes they end up being right. There's been stocks that have had multi-1,000% moves, they just don't stop. And I don't think there's a really good technical answer for that beyond just the short squeeze mentality. So all I can do is say that from a technical standpoint, either retracement here would make sense. And yeah, it's possible. This is a corrective retracement and there's going to be another wave here, but I wouldn't be surprised if this bounce doesn't go back too far above 5 or something. And then I would be cautious. So I have no position right now. I'm not in this. I'm not going to trade it up. I may trade it down if it rejects here and starts breaking down. But I don't really feel like a very, very confident about buying this at $3. It's just at 50 cents. Given the news and all that jazz, it's kind of just a risk on play if you want to do it. It's your call. Maybe buying at 3, it goes to $12. You know, the higher ranges here were quite far. I mean, I marked off several 12, 23, 48. I would just urge you to like remember that this already ran 1,400%, which is really far. It didn't start at $1. It didn't start at $2. It started at 50 cents. You know, so it percentage wise, this has already had like a huge move. And unless it forms like a reaccumulation, I don't know if it's going to sustain. So we'll see. You know, like we'll see. Right now, I'm just kind of like, it's not really my play right now unless I see something good. So HYMC. Yeah, we can take a look. I don't see that as a particularly great play either, but I mean, I haven't looked at it in a minute, so maybe I'm wrong. It's been a little while. I don't think I've looked at it since I got out of it like a long time ago. But let me see if I have a chart I can use. I'll just use this one for now. Hey, good morning. Yeah, same deal. I mean, this has already had like a pretty humongous move. And I think when we looked at it last time, we talked about, some possibilities with where this goes and and whatnot. But the thing is, if I recall, this had some splits as well. So the initial run up right here was the big one when they bought it. And it got this huge squeeze motion. And then it split when it was down here. It split pretty low. This is one of those examples of a stock that has had really slow, I don't even know if I want to call it creaks, because I think it's more like a fib fan kind of thing. But it's had very slow walkout. It does have the appearance of a massive like kind of U shape here. I'm very skeptical of that, and I just said it but like 2 minutes ago, that anytime I see that, I'm kind of looking to see if there's a maybe an obvious kind of cat ear presence here, because usually there is. So what I'm looking for specifically is the first push, the lower M cross, and then the second push. This structure right here is a basic kind of a wave structure, right? Where you have a creek that's being established with a massive push, right? You're rising it up, and then you're jumping over that at a later time, and that's where you get this kind of secondary motion. I think I've already got it. I mean, you can see it right here. This is basically that motion. So this is the big break. Usually that break comes in the form of a new high if it's kind of bullish, or at least it's going to be close to that. It doesn't have to be like that, because sometimes we've seen this more downward. But then on the macro, there's like another one, right? You see this big push, and there's kind of a slow working out on this bottom of the rest. I find this kind of stuff to be kind of obnoxious, because it really just depends on your point of view of the ticker itself. Probably the first thing I would do, and when I say obnoxious, because I think that you could look at it from a bull or a bear standpoint. Like, one of the first things I'll do is, because of the shape and the way this built out, like a bowl, I'll think in terms of like a cup or a cup and handle, but then I have to imagine like the cat ear looks like that too. It looks like the cup shape. So is it accumulative? Is it distributive? There's a lot of volume here in this side on this push, which for the cup analysis would be probably a good thing. But then if you're looking at it from a distribution standpoint, that does mean that there's probably a decent amount of selling that's going on. You have no backup whatsoever yet. So there's nothing here that at all that looks like it's going to hold support just yet. Specifically, I'm kind of looking right now, I'm eyeballing this like 382.4 level, because this to me looks like close enough to the previous top. You see these two peaks right here. One was way back in April, and the other was right here in June. Those two peaks, to me, represent, at least for now, like kind of where that resistance is and support. And you can see the effort right here. There's like a 1-2 I kind of did it weird. But there's I don't want to call it symmetrical. It's not really symmetrical, but you can see 2 hits down, 2 hits up. That to me is always a really key thing as well, because it's usually like the middle of like a S curve, which is also a cat ear of sorts. That middle portion right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the specific area that you need to have support when you jump over. So I'm not sure, not 1,000% sure that this actually works out. This is really close to a 618 hit to the top. So it's already done a big 618 retracement from the peak here. That's something to keep in mind. And from a bear standpoint, that's your golden pocket, right, for buy-in on a short side. So it's pretty darn close to that. But then, wave-wise, I would suggest going back to this point, looking at the first hit and the last hit here on that cross down. That's it right there. That's your main creek. So the question that I'd ask currently is, we've seen that it's already jumped these. I think they're kind of irrelevant at this point. That was just to show you, like, it's more like a fan because it's going out, taking a long time. The question is, has it done anything to show support here? And the answer is no, it hasn't. So you're kind of flying high. If you think this is going to go to the moon, okay, that's a thesis. But everything else would suggest that this was definitely building back down right here towards that creek. And we have not done anything to come back and check it. So at least for now, given how parabolic this is, I would say that, yeah, there's a possibility it holds up a little bit or maybe goes back and retests the top. But it's really hard for me to look at this and not see bearish all over it. I mean, you can see the downward motion there. That's bearish divergence on the 4-hour, this on these two tops. If it loses this uptrend, which it looks like it already did, but if it loses it, it's definitely going to drop. Maybe it's like right on it. It's going to drop pretty far, like pretty fast. So yeah, there's a possibility here that this could kind of have a second life to it, second wind to it. But once it drops through this ledge, if it does that, it's going to drop pretty fast. I think you're going to see a decent retracement. We can come back to probably the place where it jumped the creek. That's fine. Or you can go to the bottom. Yeah, that's the 50% mark at $6. So that's step one. And then we'd have to see, from there what happens. It could take a long time to kind of walk back down, but that's where I would place it. And then usually on the breakout, there's another high made right here at 430. That's a long-term trend that's worth paying attention to. So I would suggest that by about April or so, this region, April, May, it's probably going to be back down to 370. You don't have to buy into that idea right now. I don't really care, but because it's like that's so far off. I get it. I get why that would be, you'd be skeptical, but I would suggest it's pretty likely. It needs to come back down to here at some point and test this and say, yeah, we're not going to go back down through. And usually there's another reason for that. I'm not really seeing it right now, but we'll mark 350 and see what that means for the stock, because that's about the area. And we'll just see if that matters that much. It matters. So that's even more important because of the way this has interacted with it in the past, specifically on that first bottom and then right here off of June. That was a big supply. So this is a major retest zone, super important for the ticker back to 350. One more thing, and then I think I'm done with this one for now. Although there was a split, and I'm not going to try to read too much into that, and I know you guys are probably thinking about gold and silver prices, and you're like, well, yeah, but they're going to the moon. Well, first of all, they've already doubled, like gold has already doubled over the last, couple years. So, I mean, if anything, this would be a little bit behind. And I believe HYMC is mostly silver, and I don't know, I'd have to look at silver prices. There's nothing wrong about that. If they find it, they find it. But yeah, there it is. So actually, this has already hit the top of the channel too. That's like perfect. So even more so, this could be like a kind of a macro retracement that's needed too. I'm not going to try to go any further than this, but there you go. And so 0.5 is 395, 618 here. So this is from a bullish standpoint. These retracements, there's the first one. That's the 480. That was the top that we marked off before. That's a 382. And then you can see the 0.5 is actually right here at 395. And then the 618 down here at 3. So that matches the waves. And then last thing would be the middle here. Usually you can kind of tell where it is, but I'm not going to do too much guesswork. I'm just going to kind of throw it on there. I think that's close. That's pretty close. So in this channel, this broke out of the middle back here in August, which is pretty strong. But then, like, if it didn't hold this level, you'd ask the question, could it go lower? And my answer is always going to be, yeah, it could. And this is where you have maybe the 786 back down to $2 at play. Not necessarily now, and not necessarily ever for that matter, but it is there. So how would this advance further? You know, you're asking the big question. Well, I'm not going to look at this on the weekly, but I can tell that this has only been overbought a few times, and it's been heavily overbought for a longer period of time here, which is typical of that cat ear. And I do see that as a possibility here on like kind of a macro level. I can see that lower portion right there, and then this being like a big U shape. And just kind of soften your eyeballs a little bit. You can see it. So I think that's fair, that might be like kind of that big U, and we're going to see that pullback. There's not really much else to say. I don't know if you could make a really strong bull case right now outside of some kind of exterior event happening, because to me this looks like it pretty much did the big move, and the only place that I would even remotely think about buying in here would be if it came above the top at $10 and like held support. So like how could you make a case? It would be really hard. You know, if this were like a Tesla or something like that, and you knew that historically this does happen, right? You knew that historically on like the 30-minute, you know, when Tesla's on a bull run, the 30-minute 50 acts like a support. You know, it can just sit here and chop like this indefinitely and just keep going up. But that only happens when it's like above moving averages and it's like in this really bullish state. For something like this, you're kind of watching, and I think this is the 50 day. That's 180. It's fine. That's also pretty close to it usually. So this is in a bullish trend right now for sure, but it's like basic retracements would take you back down. It's overextended. Basic retracements would take you back to like 570. So like at this point, it's kind of like, why bother trying to keep trading it up when it's got bearish divergence? It's already hit like a peak here very cleanly, for that matter, hit a peak on this downtrend. It hasn't quite proven anything by backing up. It's got this kind of parabolic motion. We can see it in the RSI. You could make speculation that it's going to keep going, but it's almost, to me, it's like, meh. Any correlation on the chart to AMC? Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. I mean, my thought is that they're completely different sectors. And even though AMC obviously bought this and they own a large portion of it, you know, I don't think they're largely correlated personally. And I think we've done it before. I'll add it on here. We can check it out. I don't think it's a silly question. I think it's a good question, but I just think that they're probably not going to be that connected. We can try it. I just see them as very distinct. I think originally when they said they were buying this company, I was like, oh, it's you know, they're going to somehow be connected and all this stuff. But I just don't don't feel like that's the case. I mean, I guess you could argue here like the liquidity could have been used to some degree. So it's hitting a peak. This was right when it was like announced because I remember it squeezed. So as this dropped to a low, this went to like a high and then it kind of backs up. And they both go up together at the end. But yeah, I mean, I guess you could argue that somehow liquidity was taken out, put into the other. I don't know. It's a bit of a stretch. This looks fairly similar to me. So, I mean, there's some comparison to be made there just in terms of the nature of what this is. And I know that's a drop down on that trend. We talked about this a minute ago, remember? As we were just saying, like, this is where it walks down and creates that trend. I had done something like that on AMC, but I don't believe it anymore, if that makes sense. Like, I don't see it as likely that that's still going to happen. So that would be this one, something like that. I mean, it's not really the best. I think at one point I had done this, and that would have been like suggesting it goes way back up in the future, but the only other thing we have is the downtrend there, but I mean, this already broke it, so I see some like gentle similarities, but that could just be because of market mechanics. I mean, like when the market's going up, a lot of times AMC's kind of going up. It's not always the same. That's more to do with like people call it beta, which is really just a description of events. It doesn't mean anything, in my opinion. It's not prescriptive, it's descriptive, because you're really just saying, is it running with the market or is it not? But then it flip-flops, and so it's kind of like, how useful is that information? I don't find it to be very useful. This is another example, though, of one where this peaks right here, and then AMC runs after. So, I mean, you do have a couple cases here of some continuity. This is the most similar area, I would suggest, right here. Both of these kind of drop off a cliff at the same point. But what's weird is that there's a lot of stocks that are kind of in this group where they have this drop off, and GME has a big important drop in August as well. A lot of people forget that, but if you go back and you look at August of that year, GME has a really significant motion there as well. So it's not just AMC because of Judge Zern. I just think this is more exaggerated as a result. I'm talking like AMC has run up to 10 and AMC is just like pissed, man. AMC is not going to move or what? I think they're distinct, and I don't think that AMC is not going to move. So that's my answer to you. But I'm trying to do my best to actually just kind of analyze it and see if there's a sensible reason maybe. I do see a lot of continuity here, though, in these push-ups, because like this pushes up, AMC's come down. And then look at the same thing here, this push-up early. And this is both preemptive. I mean, you could say in some ways, if there was going to be a connection, that could be a big connection point. This pushes up off of a bottom, and then AMC pushes up off of a bottom. So in theory, sure. Like, has this had a big run up? Yeah. You know, I think if you had looked back at this point, you'd have been ticked off too, you know, because like here you have the same, I mean, it honestly looks the same. Maybe there is some kind of interplay. This looks suspiciously identical. Now maybe I was wrong, you know, because maybe there's a liquidation or something going on here. I really don't know why that would be the case, but it's hard to say. But it does seem to be quite opposite. And this had peaked right here pretty much when AMC's at its bottom. I mean, it's very, very close. I wouldn't normally, again, I think they're completely different sectors. I get why people would compare them based on like ownership, but yeah, that's a similar motion that we had back here on maybe the bigger run up, at least back in March. That was a long time ago now. Very similar drop while this is peaking. But yeah, and then they're sort of in lockstep with each other. You can see the similarities in the motions here. They're pretty close. That's what I was saying. This region to me looks like the most similar. Really similar. So if I had to pick out and say, like, here's what maybe the correlation is it does to me anyways seem like perhaps, it's kind of a stretch, but perhaps this is kind of front-running AMC a little bit. I think that would be fair to say. I mean, if you look at the highs and the lows, they're very cleanly offset. I mean, they're not perfect, but they're pretty clean. I mean, you can see the offset nature of this. So it's possible. I mean, this is, again, close to peaking like it was here when this is coming down. And then you can see this is already like in a downward trend and bottoming here. And this is going up again. I'm trying to like make it as simple as I can. But this is a little off. It takes a lot longer for AMC to kind of get to the top. This is considerably different than this timing. So, like, just take a comparison and look at them. I'm not really worried about AMC. I genuinely think it's pretty close to going, but I think that there's going to be doubt until it happens, and it's going to feel like it's not going to go until it happens. So, I mean, it's not that off. If you look at where the peak is here to the next peak, it's not completely different. This really has like extra move in it anyways. It's pretty close. So close enough that I'd say it's a good guess maybe. Yeah, I mean, so this would suggest, just glancing at it, this would suggest that as this comes down and liquidates, maybe AMC peaks. You know, there's not a lot of rhyme or reason to like when AMC kind of starts going here. I can't really see that. I can see there's a sell-off period that sort of correlates to where the bottom is, but I'm looking at the actual price action itself. I'm not seeing anything obvious. Like, here's exactly when it happens, you know? And I'm pretty good at seeing that kind of weird stuff, and I'm not seeing anything like that, so they look different. Maybe the initial sell, there's kind of a double peak here, and then it sells off. That initial sell off. I mean, if you think about operators selling, they wouldn't be selling here. A lot of we think that they're kind of selling throughout. They do have short positions they would be opening up, but like, here, let me do us a favor real quick. I'm going to change this to like a light color, so this looks really different. Because it looks too similar. It's like blue and blue. But this right here would be where you'd have most of your sell-off. And so you'd be selling while AMC was going down. You can see the volume pick up here and here. So that's pretty much where your selling is happening, going into that bottom. And then it looks like the buy up, while this is kind of coming back down before a final distribution. That's where the buy up happens on AMC. I see one peak, two peaks of volume, maybe three peaks. So this is a little longer, which might explain some things. But this is a little slower. It's very methodical, kind of boring. And I definitely can see how the first one makes some sense. I don't really think the second one does. This is when it crosses the creek on AMC. So maybe, again, liquidating here. I'm going to go vertical now. Let's see what that looks like. We'll see where that is. Liquidating here. And then putting your money into AMC after it's jumped the creek. Perhaps. It does it again here. There's a secondary, like, bigger one that's more really, really important. Push up. So there's a little bit of a connection there. And then the rest of this looks very different. So this is all uptrending, coming up to jump the creek. Let's see where that happens. I keep saying that, but I really want to see where that's going on. This is where the ultimate big move happens. That's fascinating because this is right where I saw on GME those iterations really end and we started that buy up period. But perhaps, and this is just a thought, perhaps this is not over because this is such a huge move. It's taking a really long time. So we're basically we're doing something that logically isn't really that sound, which is we're kind of trying to make a connection with something that we really don't have proof. We're just observing. We have some correlation, but we don't have proof that there's causation. Like we really would have to go back and know what every operator is doing. We'd have to look at volume inflows and outflows. We'd have to sort of prove that from behind the scenes that somebody is selling this and then buying the other, for example. I personally am not going to do that. So I'm just telling you right now, like, there's going to be a flawed logic in this, but it's fine. I think it's a good thing to still look at and take into account. So how would I interpret this? Well, again, like most of your volume, you can see right here, this volume is really heavy after it breaks out, which makes sense because this is your markup. So you're buying, and then the second half is mostly selling. So you're pushing the stock price up and then you're selling here. Let me split this in half real quick. I'm going to add another third to this move. Because the other thing is that this is a wave. You know, it may not always seem that way to us, but this is like a measured wave. So, I mean, like these should have incremental parts. And they tend to just kind of keep going until they don't. So, I mean, you can go backwards and see if it worked in the past. I would say that they look very even up until this point. So we may want to do that as well and just see. And AMC's kind of had the same motions. You can see the upsides bump, 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 bump. They've been very much in lockstep till right here. This is where it's really stayed flat. Or has it? You know, we'll talk more about it today, but AMC's got a lot of... I know that things haven't gone the way we want them to go. Like, timing-wise, I've already kind of admitted that I think I was just wrong. I mean, there's nothing else to it. And I don't know if it's because of the warrant thing or if it's because of rate cuts or just the state of liquidation, you know, of rolling positions. I have no idea. There's a lot of things that went into some of the ideas that I had. Don't really care to make all the excuses. Right now, it's enough just to say that I was wrong about initial timing. September was a turning point, but it didn't ultimately break there. It didn't change character. It's still kind of doing the same thing. So we're really at another iteration already. And we can talk about that like a fourth or a fifth. So, I mean, it just keeps going. And we've got earnings around the corner, so on and so forth. Maybe a rate cut coming. I don't think CPI and all that junk really matter that much. I think the warrants, if there was one thing that I would kind of point the finger at, I honestly think it was the GME warrants. And I'm not going to go any further than just to say that, but that's kind of what my thought is. I think they kind of screwed us. And then it gave AMC enough time. Now they've also announced this other dilutionary thing that's going to happen in December. It just changes stuff. I mean, I don't know if the operators already knew that, but the idea of iterations being able to just kind of continue, they can go to a certain point and then they kind of have to make a decision. We're really right there. And I think September 28th to October 20th is kind of my last window here. I don't think there's much else to it. Maybe it does go around earnings, and I'm wrong about that. I'm not sure, but in November. But I think there's a very, very narrowing window for AMC. It needs to kind of make a decision. Otherwise, my default is just going to drop into a low spring and just chill out because it will create space. And then I don't know why you would even have to run it, for a while, maybe till January or something, or December. It just one of those things. But one I'm curious about is some of these moves. They do look pretty similar. And then right here, this breakout is so significant, this moment. I find that to be very, very curious. I'm going to use this as an example. This is probably the most similar thing we're going to be able to look at. I'm going to get rid of some of this other noise. My charts get messy fast. This is the way of things. So this is, to me, is probably the most important. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of creeks and stuff that are really tight here, and you're losing space very quickly. So I think I had till October 31st, but I mean, like I said, if it happens in November, it happens in November. I'm not going to complain about it. I just want to make you aware that was like kind of on my mind. I don't really see a lot of room after that, and I just can't imagine if you don't move then. I don't know why you wouldn't just drop. So I'm going to do something a little bizarre. See, this is where I'm kind of wondering, because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about this move right here and how this is where it broke out from the bigger wave. And then where does it go back to? It revisits that August level. Most curious. And you're really going way back up. Let me see where that is. 944. Yeah. That's right back to August. That's what I was wondering. That's an interesting little tidbit. Because for AMC, going back to August is us going back to 6, which is kind of the target that I had on the chart anyways. Really. I'm not making that up. So it's kind of a curious thing. It's not horizontal. You might be thinking, well, that's not true because it should be like way up there. But I'm looking at the parallels coming down and specifically the creeks. And we've been talking about this $6, $7 area for quite a while. Right here, the 627. I want to say, and I don't want to speak too quickly about it. I want to say that, let me get rid of that extra stuff. I want to say that the main downtrend is actually in that same spot. So let me see. Pretty sure it is. It's going to be hard to do without extended hours on. But I think that's where it is. So it's right there because it opened up. I don't know. You can't really tell. I've extended hours on so you can see the higher move, but it opens like right there. So I don't know. To me, that's actually really close to correct. In fact, we might even be above it. Let me turn off. let's go back to regular trading hours. And we might even be outside of that now on that chart shift. Yeah, it's pretty close. See, I wasn't, I promise you guys, if you're watching me, you're probably like, why did he put the line in the middle of the lines? I was kind of eyeballing it. It looks like I was a little high, if anything. There it is. See how this is like interacting with that to some degree? And then you've got, it looks like, see, there it is. It did jump it. This is really interesting because it's kind of making similar strides in a slow way. But then I wonder if, I don't think that's significantly different. And I don't want to go any further than that for this, just this little comparison for right now. There's another set of parallels that's probably more accurate anyways. And I don't know. I'm not using those right now. So I'm using just this creek. That's it. But that's actually probably not the best parallel to use. And parallel, I'm talking about like long-term downtrend. There's another one that I was using that's better. Like this one might even be significantly better. Just for a second, let me turn these off so I can see what I'm doing. Yeah, going from peak to March to Judge Zern is a clean 1, 2, 3 hit. This looks like a distribution over the top of that. And then it doesn't quite, it kind of ignores the lower triangle here because the buying climax isn't really included in that. But you could do either one. And you can see that when I turn this back on, this is really close to where that is on that deviation. Like extremely close. In fact, it looks like it may have just barely poked above it, which I keep thinking about because I've got another one on here, and that might even be the same parallel. It looks basically the same, but it's slightly different because this is coming from the split. And I did that because if you go back to the split, this is where there's a triangulation of, I think the shift value happened. We'll go back to HYMC in a second just to see the comparison again. But like, this is where that shift happened, and you can go to that drop point here, but use like the shift down, and it actually correlates to this, which is really interesting. I've talked about this before at length, although it was in a crappy video that I did that was kept cutting in and out. My theory is this is actually more of a standard distribution, and then it is a shift, but they basically shifted it down twice. So they did one downshift and then two downshifts so that each of these, so basically the top variation became where the bottom variation was. So if you were doing like 3 marks, you'd have them all intersect right here, which is right where that split is. It's really fascinating. And then what's really crazy to me is that the markings here on that deviation in terms of direction end up being the same. So I think I'm right because I think that it generates for itself its own case for why this is probably accurate. The direction here maintains the same direction on the top, as if the operators are kind of charting it not that way, but like that the movement themselves, it's hard to describe. I think about it like a moving average. And I think about mathematically, a standard deviation would just offset the moving average up or down, like a particular amount. So naturally, like if your chart is describing the action of the moving average, and it is, it's mathematically, it's influencing the moving averages all the time. It would be the same with a Bollinger Band, for example. It would constantly be influencing those depending on what you have as your settings. It would be shifting them like equal amounts so that they're basically all running quote unquote parallel with their, and they would be running parallel essentially. I say quote unquote because it's not like a straight line. It'd be moving lines, but they'd be running in sync with each other is what I'm trying to say. So it makes sense to me that the lower one from back here now connects to the upper one. and it still interacts with where we are currently. So I did this one and I was messing around with it, and I was like, it really to me looks like, depending on how you do it, like this could in fact be like those on HYMC. We did that in the beginning. It's very similar to those kind of waves out where this is like slow crossing. Very, very similar, but it's happening from a different fulcrum, like a different center point, pivot point, if you will, on AMC, and that's the split date. You can see it here. Like if you look at this motion, look at the top from December 6th. All I did was pull this line down from that fulcrum, from the pivot, the center mark. I pulled it down to here, and then you can see that jump lands on top of it, right? And if you go to the next one up, you can see that again, we're kind of like interacting with it right now. I've got a lot of mess down here, but we've pushed it. Like it didn't push it and then it did. Each iteration is trying to like kind of push over the next. And you're doing that in the context of like a macro downtrend as well. So there's another additional kind of downtrend here, and it's pushing up. And as it's doing that, it's kind of pushing against that as well. So you're going to get to this point where it comes to a head, and someone else referenced like a triangle. It's probably there as well. Because again, if you look at where those, the creek would be, it's kind of evolving as each of these pushes out. So every time it pushes out, it's pushing that creek out. So you're coming into this place where it's like running out of space. And at some point, you're going to have to make a decision, because you will cross the creek, and you'll make a decision about, are you going to jump it and go push new highs and go back up to the top of the range here, or are you going to reject going out and you're going to come back down? Granted, it could take a while, but I've been saying like that for a little bit, but I thought it was going to come up, build up here, and then drop pretty low. It never did. We just kind of stayed very much like an accordion of this, which GME did the same thing. It kind of created like an accordion of that May bottom, where it's like really similar, but it's like stretched out really far. It's fascinating. Anyways, so if we were using HYMC, which I've not done before, but if we were using it, I'd probably suggest that we turn off to some degree. We don't worry too much about maybe the nitty gritties of it, and we really just focus on, and maybe the best thing to do is just kind of focus on these compressions where those breakouts occurred. I'm going to like leave it right there. These are where the creek crosses happen and you get the big buy-ups. So I've been marking these off because these are my iterations. And I think we just did one, by the way. I think we've already done that one. This one it looks kind of weird because it's not as steep, but I think we've already done it. This one simplified even more because you get a sense of like, oh, this is where that breakout was, right? We can kind of look back and see what was going on, again, to some degree. So this is pretty interesting because you can see that the compressions have gotten really, really tight. I mean, they're almost like a fib reduction, right? Each time. I don't know if you can see it that well, but I'll try to make these a little bit brighter. But yeah, it's almost like a fib time reduction. It could be. I've not tried to do that. Technically, with a fib time reduction, Fibonacci's are just like one added to the previous equals the next kind of thing. That's what the Fibonacci sequence is. I don't see that right here. It looks almost bigger than that. Like if you add these two together, it doesn't give you that. So I don't think it's quite a fib, but it has that kind of exponential reduction. It looks to me, and I think I did this before, as like almost a third. It's a little bit more than 1/3 the distance each time. So it's definitely compressing quite a bit. So the question is like, what's going on into these moments, right, from beginning to end on this ticker? And I don't know, it seemed kind of self-explanatory here, but it looks like I know these lines are kind of backwards, but I'm looking at the creek crosses. It really looks like ever so slightly like after each of these, you're getting a kind of a buy up motion. These are then they start going crazy here. Yeah, and then this is the middle right there. It's the same thing. Kind of takes a breather and then goes again right here where this is taking a breather. So think about it that way. When this is taking a breather here, AMC is pushing up. So it is interesting to think about because like during this time period, this is selling off. It's possible to some degree that money is being switched over and then this is pushing up again. And then this is where AMC is kind of up. And again, you have a kind of sell down right here. I don't know, because these kind of overlap differently, but there is a sense of kind of, oh, it's taking a break when it hits that next level. After that, I think this is kind of a bust. I'm not sure what else I would do with this. Like, that's kind of all I would do with it. Some of it looks very one-to-one. I don't know. It doesn't really look like it's opposite. Back here, a lot of it looked very one-to-one. It was kind of moving together. But, you know, regardless, this period of time from January until August, that's the period of time where you have, at least in this HYMC, where you have a cross up. And this is really where you're jumping kind of the middle of this trend. You've got the bigger creek jump. You definitely have the bigger breakout here. It's jumping over the top. You can see that's the top. So there's a period of buy up here, this kind of choppy motion as it's purchasing. It's like an ascending accumulation of sorts. And I would suggest there was probably more accumulation even back here while it was still selling off. But this is where it's starting to get ready to go. And then it breaks out. So from that time period of build out right here, very similar to where AMC has had its time period right here of build out and overlapping and trying to get over that creek level. And I mean, we just did it. I mean, it definitely has the appearance that it's kind of layering up over those creek levels. So, I mean, I wouldn't suggest that they're completely disconnected. It could be very much like you liquidate HYMC and put that money into AMC. It hasn't gone yet, so why not, you know? But it's purely, I wouldn't say it's speculative, but it is purely like a correlation. I couldn't say it as a causation. That doesn't really make sense. I can't prove that. So it's not provable from my vantage point. Somebody maybe could do it, but I couldn't do it. I'm not going to try to do it. And then another thing that's interesting is that HYMC, and this is kind of my final point, was like I was looking at where does that go back to, and it does retrace all the way back to August. I think that's really fascinating. I wouldn't have put that much importance on this little tiny area right here, but to say maybe it's like the middle of this top range, because it does look like it kind of comes back to the middle here, of like roughly the middle where this was. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have noticed it. But I do think that's really interesting because our expectation for AMC, at least my expectation for AMC, is that it is doing a big wave, kind of like this did, right? This is a macro, huge wave. It took a really long time to get here, right? And it would have required a lot of patience on the part of people trading it, but it is a humongous wave. There's no move in the market that's not a sine wave of some kind, right? That's just the nature of trends in the market. So it's not a stretch to call it that or to say it was doing something like this. It hyperextends, yeah, and it never goes way low. And what we've been talking about on AMC is that what AMC has largely done is kind of followed this wave to an extent, but then in recent times it's kind of went away from it. And I'm arguing that when it goes back, it's going to go up all of a sudden because it has a history of doing that. It's kind of like the inversion of what happened here. And I do think that that's a real thing in the market, kind of moving away from your target. We just talked about it on Beyond Meat. That's kind of a strange one. And Broadcom did something similar recently. So you get this nasty strength test, and then it just goes. But this is probably where I would put that. I would not, again, have suggested that if someone hadn't brought it up, but I did think it was worth looking at. So I'm thinking that's a possibility here, that maybe that's the target in mind. And when we go back and we look at this, and I'll make it a bright yellow or something so you can see it. That is the creek down, at least from August 2022 to August 2023, using the peaks, not using anything else. That's already kind of there. And if we went straight up to it, it'd be like $5, which isn't very high. Using maybe a different set of parallels, like the more macro downtrend, I think that's maybe more appropriate for us. That one is quite different. That actually suggests that it is indeed going to come back up to 670, and that's really close to where that deviation is. And that was the case I tried to make on that really crappy video, was that this deviation is actually determining, to some degree, possibility targets up and down. However high and however low it may seem, that's what I'm going to argue, because, and I don't know what you guys caught of that, if it was just that crappy, but it was crappy. But like, this target particularly surprised me quite a bit, that when it hit that peak, it went directly to 246, which is where this lower deviation was. I can't shake that. And I went back and looked at this way back in 2020, and it was the same thing. And I know that video that I did was garbage. Like, we had so many problems during that. Just to really, really briefly kind of recap the thoughts there. What I was suggesting was that there's these pivotal moments on the chart when you're entering into a range and you're breaking down. We call them drop ledges in some of the ways. We call them, sometimes it's like the final caddy or like a hook, but I'm just going to, in this case, call it like a drop ledge. You're entering into like a lower range, basically. You're leaving a previous range behind. And those moments are really pivotal. And anytime I see that, I was kind of like looking at that, seeing where those markers were. And here you have two markers, for example, back in 2020. And I'm going to use the middle marker. And you can see that eventually, this is exactly where it goes. Like, it's essentially measuring out where the bottom is. And then this one as well, even though it goes below it, that could arguably be like all strength tests, right? Pushing beneath that lower deviation. And then you get this kind of equal parts reaction above, which is also pretty wild, that there's like this massive push up above. Yeah, we know the buy button removal happened, don't get me wrong, but like, it is really fascinating to kind of like look back at this and see that connection with those potential deviation markers. So I think that it's a real thing. Beyond that, I did comparisons to like 3 other areas. I'm not going to do those right now. So anyways, I do believe that in that video I did, that was really crappy, that we kept cutting out. So I did this, and I showed you guys like back here how it points to like way down here, and eventually where it goes to the lower end. It even pointed to like the top, which is kind of crazy. This obviously builds out differently because of the move down. And then you have to kind of consider from then on these targets. And I use this one. This is the only one I'll maybe show you right now. This is where you have this kind of drop down, and it does a really good job of kind of telling you where the tops and the bottoms might be here if you use these 3. And that's essentially like bracketing where that high move and the low move are, like, perfectly. So on a macro scale, it's not perfect. You know, it could be slightly off. Like this is actually almost perfect. This is like 1360 right here. This is slightly high, right? This goes below it. Ultimately, this was like 270. But I mean, it's right there, right? And that's the same drop ledge that you get in entering this lower range. You know, if you look at the big picture, this is ultimately where that range top stays, we come back to later. So it's very fascinating to see that and see how it's interacting with the movements. So what I was saying is that, like, if you look at that and you look at it as if it's 2020, this has spent a lot more time down bottom, and we're really right now we're sitting on that ledge right there. I mean, I don't think that's a coincidence. It's also part of the reason why I believe that this variation, this deviation, even though it's crappy, it feels crappy and it feels like you're never going to leave, is also part of the reason why I'm like not convinced that if we were to drop, that we wouldn't have something longer term if we were to truly drop. It's a little confusing to me to think that we drop and if we didn't immediately react back up and leave, I would be very confused. And so we've been talking about, like, this is crazy, but we've been talking about like 260 because it hit there. And I mean, looking at these levels, it's like it really matches. It does. And I'm not making weird stuff up just to make stuff up. This came because I was looking at the long video that I did that was really crappy. I was actually looking at the dilution data, and I was looking at these two spots. One is like 491, the other's 295. And I was looking at the math there, and I thought, this is really strange numbers. They gave them like shares at 170, and it ends up being like this kind of double down motion from like the 419 to this 295 to like 170. It's a really strange correlation, and I thought it was just really bizarre, like that this particular new exchangeable notes had these mathematical numbers. I was like, I just don't get it. And for some reason, it just kind of clicked in my brain all of a sudden that maybe this chart shift value is more than what we think it is, right? Because the more I started thinking about it, the more I started thinking about how these numbers have really represented constants for us. Like we have one here as well. This is like a micro version of the same thing. And I'm not sure that this works out quite the same. I think you could argue that it doesn't. But we have like similarities that are quite profound, where I was getting certain targets at certain times. This is what made me do this. I'm telling you that because I want you to understand. I don't know. I guess because I want to be understood in like it wasn't just random. I was thinking about these numbers very concretely as like, but then it occurred to me while I was thinking about these numbers that, hey, this is really similar to these targets that I was getting at these times. I don't have like the best memory in the world, believe it or not. I forget like all kinds of stuff. But when I'm fixated on something like AMC, I tend to remember like weird details that really don't feel relevant anymore, but they're there. Like, and I remember distinctly certain targets being in view, and I definitely remember that 8-something target that we had. And it really bugged me because I was like, why did I have that target, that 8-something target when we were down here? And then it occurred to me that, man, there's a strange connection with where this chart is and where the targets are, because I had this 8 to 9 target back here if this were to break out and go. And I'm like, why, right? But then I'm like thinking about in terms of where we are now, and I'm like, now I've got this $6 target. And I'm like, why? But then I look at this and I'm like, it's the same level, right? That's super strange. So I started to think about that because I was thinking about this flip around and how that number, that 180 number, also represents, and this is the number that they gave them the shares at. So it's not just this kind of flipperoo here, which it is, right? Because again, it's another offset. It's like a similar offset right there at 295. That's where the offering was completed, and this is where one was announced. And that flipperoo is like perfectly down to like this value that they were given shares at, which is like 170 something. I just thought that was super bizarre. But then I was like, wait a minute. that's where this is going, right? Because then I was like, wait a minute. I know that number because I've seen that in the deviation, and that doesn't make sense. Why would that be there? So then I decided to flip it and add both of these, and I was like, what the crap? right? Because at this point, I remember thinking if it goes up, a lot of those targets were like looking up here at like 8 something, right? And then we started getting those 180 targets like way back here. And I'm thinking to myself, that's bizarre, right? And then where do we start getting like 150 targets? You know, when we enter this lower area, suddenly 150 seems a little bit likely. Why? Why would 150 all of a sudden seem possible, right? It seemed odd to me. It's like kind of felt like it came out of nowhere because we didn't really talked about 150 at all, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, 150 is kind of popping up all of a sudden. Well, because if you go back and you look at this and you look at where that middle is here, it's like 130s. Like it's dragging the targets lower, and it's like this is why when we were talking about S curves, it's mind-boggling to me in some ways, but it's like this is why we're talking about S curves, and you look at these S curves and you're like, well, they're going down to like 160 or something if this drops low. And I'm like, why would that even matter? Well, I think it has to do with just the height of the range, a lot of this stuff. But I also think it's probable that this is a long-term deviation that they're using, operators are using. So if I were to draw this without the complexity of the noise, it may not look like this. I don't want to say it looks like a moving average either, but it could be quite similar, perhaps, in nature. Where I may need to do that in the future, where I just take like the 180 or something on the 4 hour, you know, or something like that, or the 200 on, you know, SMA, something like that, and just shift it. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'll figure it out. Maybe I could do it with a formula or something, just similar to the way I did these. It's probably that simple, but that would maybe be a better way to represent this instead of the noise. But I mean, for now, this is what I've got. So I think it may be a standard deviation is what I'm trying to say. And it would explain why these targets have shifted so much. The lower targets have always kind of remained the same because we largely, in this area, especially from the beginning, we kind of had always looked at this $2 to 180 region, you know? So this, from the get-go, has been on the news, I think, or on the radar. Remember back here, Nick P was talking about 190s and stuff like that? And he was getting those targets from a variety of things, probably extensions, but like, look at where this is, right? Look at where this is right here. When this is at the peak here at 439, right before it drops down, look at where that number is. It's like 192. I've nothing personal against the guy or for the guy. I'm just saying, like, I remember he said 190 and I was like, I don't think he's going to go to 190. I think he's going to like 250. But like, I could see where he got the target from at the time because there were certain trajectories that seemed to be meeting there. But then I'm looking back at this, I'm like, that's right where that deviation was. I don't want to say it in an oversimplified way, but it definitely feels like that's correct. So I'm like looking back like, oh, this is weird, man. It's almost like this is where we were trying to go. And you know what's freakier about it? And I'm not sure, again, if this is, I don't know what to say about this beyond just it's really bizarre and I don't fully understand it. I don't know what else to say about it right now. But what's really freaky to me is I just cannot understand this, is that there's a lot of continuity in terms of like these motions between one chart to the next. I think part of that is just parallels. Like this is technically just a parallel to this. So, I mean, you could just reason that, well, it's just the same angle, so who cares? But it's weird to me that they match up, and I don't know what to do with that. That part I haven't figured out yet. I cannot figure that out. I just don't know. It's pretty mind-boggling because I've done it several different times trying to like figure out like what is it that what is it that I'm seeing here, right? Like this freaks me out. Like why is this hitting there? I don't know. I have no idea. Is it predicting where that deviation is going to be at that time? Like the ebbs and flows? Is it predictive in that nature? So like But in order to be predictive in that way, you'd have to kind of know that this was going to go down and then back up. So this is also going to go down and back up. I think that's probably all there is to it. And it's not like some weird, I don't know, time map. Like, I don't know what the heck you would call it. I have no clue. I feel dumb when I look at stuff like this. I'm like, I don't know. Really don't know why it would do that. But it did. You know what I mean? So, or was it? So it's just really bizarre to me. Like, did they already know when they were starting to do this? Or is this like not an inevitability? That's another thing, is like we think it's all predetermined. Maybe it's not predetermined, you know? Maybe this structure would have built out and they just chose a lower parallel, and you take it with what it is that, oh, well, then they announce this dilution, and so they drop it down based on the figures presented, and now we're just kind of doing the same thing. And at some point, who knows? Maybe this could have gone up. I don't know how it would have looked. I have no clue. But maybe it's possible this in some other reality would have gone up to here. Like, I don't know. I don't know why that would be the case. So I haven't quite figured that out yet, but it is weird, right? And I find that to be the most peculiar thing about all this. So that's partially the reason why I've kept this on here. Anyways, so my bigger point in all of this is just to say that this is creating some really interesting mathematical measurements that I can use, and I haven't fully utilized them yet, but it's definitely created some that I can use, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with it when it comes to iterations and like the bigger picture. But I think this is it. I think it's a kind of Occam's razor, you know, it's like the simplest idea there might be the right one. And I think the simplest idea is that this is the upper range. And I mean, it makes sense because now look at how this has been brought down equal parts away. So therefore this has been brought down to the previous top. So it makes sense. So the numbers, if I had them wrong, this wouldn't match up. But because they're pretty much correct, I might be a little off. I'm using 2.2636, which is a weird number, right? But because I'm pretty darn close, I think that that's the reason why these are matching so well. And I definitely think with this one, I must be pretty dang close, because I mean, that being exactly where that bottom is kind of freaky, right? That 246, that freaks me out. That's like exactly where that top is, in accordance with where this was. So I think I'm right. I used the formula to get to that. You guys are like, what did you do? Go back to December 2024. See if you can find a video. I spent like 3 hours doing some kind of math thing backwards to try to get to valuation stuff, because I was really confused by what they were doing when they were labeling their valuations weird. He said something like their value is like 1060, and I was like, where the crap did that come from, you know? I remember thinking that didn't make any sense. And then I went back and just retroactively messed with the shifting values. And I got to it, and I thought, well, maybe this is the right one. It's a 226.36% shift. So maybe that's the right number. Now I'm looking at it like maybe that was just a deviation. Maybe it wasn't a shift at all. They used the shift. They used it as a shift value. Yeah, but it was really about moving deviations away. Probably based on valuation stuff. So, anywho. So this wouldn't surprise me if it came up to here. I think I'd be less than surprised. The other thing about this is that this is, from a simplistic standpoint, again, this is really just the top of the range. So, I mean, it makes sense that this is where you'd want to go if you're going to eventually break out. It's also where these creeks are. So, I mean, there's just so much stuff there. And to some degree, maybe not the fullest degree, but to some lesser degree, perhaps, this is where those... this is where that kind of middle drop down, I think, in between the cat ears is, which is where you'd have that intersection up top. I'm less than confident about that, but I think this is roughly where the middle is. January till about February 14th this little downward section right here, this is where all the center marks are on the bigger structure down. I'm just not 100% on where they are, so I've been using different things and I just can't quite nail it. I have like 3 on one chart and I'm like, I don't know which one it is. I wish I did, but I just don't. Mostly because the markers are not constant. They seem to be moved a couple different times. But anyways, I digress. So, what does this need to do? Well, maybe HYMC is playing a part in this, and this sell-off right now is going to start bringing money back to AMC. We can't know that for sure. It's just a matter of correlation. Perhaps it's there. It seems like it's there. I mean, I could make an argument it's there, but I don't think I could prove it. So I think it's a bit of a dead end. We'll just have to take it for what it is. We're losing a little bit of connection. It's about noon, so that makes sense. Usually about noon, my internet starts crapping out. But yeah, I mean, we've got Tesla's like booking it. Well, good for me. I'm in Tesla to the upside. Hopefully it's looking good. We've got some correlation with HYMC. We've got some decent chance with AMC with this deviation junk. I'm also looking at micro iterations. I want to hit this really fast. Both AMC and GME, to me, they look like they're just iterating again and again. And I know it seems weird to say that with GME, but it really does. And I may not get to it before this internet craps out, so I'm going to do my best. But I genuinely think that it looks like it's just iterating again and again. And it's a different iteration, but it looks like very similar to like a stretched out version that's also iterating of May 2024. No, it's probably mine. Mine likes to die around noon, which is why my afternoon streams have been really bad. I was trying to hit the morning stream today to cut through the traffic because I thought maybe it's a traffic thing, and I think it is. I think that somebody or somewhere, someone's getting on the internet or something in this area. I learned one new thing, which is about 120 people in my neighborhood in this region which is quite a bit, have this internet. Because we had an outage, real outage, this past weekend, and I went to their map, and they said they had 120 that were out, and I thought, that's interesting. So it could be that well, maybe a bunch of people are getting on at noon for some reason and streaming or something like that. I have no idea. But anywho, I digress. I was looking at this. I went to great lengths to do a video, and I didn't post it. But then I thought, well, it's actually pretty simple. And the simplicity of it is this. Until this breaks above like $3 here and holds, and it's specifically going to be, I think, a region between 3 and 330. And this 318 is going to be very critical, but for now, you really just need to see a higher high, and that keeps the bar for that keeps lowering. So as you go along, just remember, like, the first higher high here may not matter, and that's this one. So this is the 1-2. We get the creek cross. This is what happens every time. We get the creek cross. After the creek cross, we have a big breakout, okay? But this is what's been happening every time. After we have this creek cross, we get this big breakout, and then we come back down, and we make a lower low. Now, that's a problem because it's a signal of weakness. We're going back through the original breakout point. And I went back and double-checked it, and it's for sure correct. When this thing jumps the creek, it backs up, and it hits a high, or hits a low. In this case, it was like 284, right, back in May. When it came back down, it drops to 279. Now, this sets the stage for a distribution. So you basically have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wave down, right? But then you consecutively make another low and then a final low. And this one is where you get this kind of like cat ear structure where it sort of hangs on for a minute and then drops. It's all distributive, okay, to some degree. And you see the same thing here. When we get to the creek jump, and there might be 2, all right, this one's a little different because it does have a slight change, but the same thing happened on like the macro, and I don't want to get into that one right yet. But this is that one's huge and kind of confusing. But this is where you got that big breakout. So the volume pours in here after the creek jump. And again, it's at 281, but when it comes back down, it hits like 280 or something. It's like slightly below. So again, it checks the bottom and then it comes back up again. I had seen that as like the 1-2 top, and I saw this as a change of character because it pushed over, in my opinion, the main creek, which I don't have on the chart right here. This one's probably is close enough, this guy. But there is a creek that's extremely important. It looks like it's a little off. It may have been because I was zooming in and out and like moving stuff around. It looks a little bit off right now because it should be to the peak here in May, and it looks like it's not hitting that. So I don't know if I can change it. Nah, I can't. The bar for that is a little bit off. So anyways, this should be slightly higher. But what changed specifically was that it went into a higher high. So the second move, which again starts the distribution flow, actually pushed higher than the first move. And you definitely see two distinct buy-ins here, and you get that lower low. So I know that it's not possible that I'm like completely off here. Because the lower low is a key signal. It's a sign of weakness, and then it pushed back up again. This is basically like a hooking motion, these two big ones. And the hooking motion on the macro was like our December push up. So there is a distinction to it. Rocks and hope. Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much how it is. What was important about this was that, there we go, this definitely breached the top. So when I looked at this, I thought, well, not only did it make a higher high, which is a change of character, which would be like let's say an upper sweep. You can call it a UT if you want, or UTAD, I don't care. You just call it a sweep high. It went above the top. Then it comes down and it sweeps low, like the previous ones, and it drops through the rising trend. And I think that it's very similar, although not one-to-one. I did this in extended trading hours, which is why it looks a little odd. I think it's very, very similar to what you see in 2024 on the smaller picture because there's a rising trend. It's slightly off, and I know I did this in extended trading hours, so I should turn this back on. This might mess up my lines again. At least that one. That one is not meant to be there. It's this guy on the bottom. So we did get the lower low here. We push up. We made a new high, and we came back down. In my opinion, there's nothing really fancy about this move up to like 297 that happened seemingly out of nowhere. I think it's just a way of distributing here along this parallel. So every time there's a parallel cross, there's a massive candle nearby, and there's usually like a hooking candle as well. This just overextends, but I don't think there's anything significant about it. Otherwise, this looks essentially identical to this cross down. And then significantly, the next iteration up goes back and retests that parallel. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So you can see the push up here, again, on the creek cross. You've got this kind of rising trend, but locally it's got a weakness. Then it drives back down, right, during the sell test through the parallel. And when the next iteration starts, it crosses over. You get a big buy-in. It comes back up to the previous parallel. So my expectations here, based on this patterning, behavioral patterning, okay, that's all iteration is. It's not meant to be like super complex. My expectation was that this was going to, if this continued and it didn't hold here, which it didn't, then you'd have a drop down again and you'd start a new iteration. And we see that. There's a very distinct, again, it's really, really similar to this, even in the way it looks visually, which is kind of nice, but there's a really distinct sell down here through that ledge, and it's the same parallel structure. You have the, I've been using like an arc to kind of describe like this, almost like a 1, 2, 3, but really if you think about it, if this is a 5 wave, this makes sense that it made 3 consecutive new lows, because that would be the case, right? So then you see this 1, 2, 3 right here. So this is absolutely like the same in terms of like consistency and like what's happening. It has yet to change in terms of downside. It's yet to change its character except for one thing, which is that it did indeed puncture this bottom uptrend. And that's really important because up until this point, it has not. All right. Now, if you're reading this as just kind of a standard range, you may think, well, it's probably necessary to come back down to like 265 because you need to come back down through this bigger structure right here, this bottom. But then I would say, if you do that, why not even just go further and go to the previous bottom? Because again, this could be considered like a phase B on the macro at 246. So it kind of lends itself to this kind of bigger picture spring. If this thing were to start going parabolically down, I think it's very possible. I find that to be intriguing, not necessarily definite, but it's intriguing, and I think it's a strong possibility. So I looked at it and I thought, well, if it continued to do the exact same thing without having like perfect knowledge of exactly what it's going to do, if it goes and makes a higher high, it's going to be pushing very close to this 297 top here. I made a little bar. So if it does what it did here on this previous one, it may go all the way back up and push it again, which would be around this 290 pocket. That's possible. It could still make a second higher high here because this would be the first big buy up after the creek cross. Again, the creek cross already happened. And then I looked at this, and sure enough, there it is. I was like, did it make a lower low when it came back down? Well, unfortunately for us, they left a little liquidity gap on the regular trading hours. There's a weird little jump at 273. They just left it before they took off to the upside in this big 4% up day. Everyone was really excited for a minute, but it was like they left a little gap there. When they came back down, they didn't just stop there. I mean, they're basically at the bottom of 273's range to basically hit the top of 272 if you look at it on like a minute chart. But the point is that this again went below the previous. You can see it right there. So during this pullback, it goes lower than where it took off when it did the creek jump. So again, you've got the sell down, the sell test, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, you've dropped through the parallel. Again, you get the little creek cross and the big buy up. It's this sudden explosive move, just like the last 4 that we've had, right? But it doesn't exceed the top of the previous one. It didn't manage to make a higher high. Even though this one has a change of character and that the second top does come higher, it did push over the main creek for sure right here. This one is kind of the same. It kind of pushes high. Ultimately, it still made that lower low here, so that secondary action brings it back down. It still does the same thing, unfortunately. It hasn't changed just yet. So if this were to do the exact same thing, I had speculated and did measurements that it probably couldn't last past like October 24th. Now this is kind of where things get a little dicey because time is a fickle mistress, right? She gives and she takes, and she doesn't always tell you why. I would suggest that the timing of October 24th is correct if you're just doing a ratioed measurement. But I cannot say with absolute certainty that that's actually going to be the case because you have to think about like what's going on, right? And what's going on in the market is there's a lot of stuff going on in the market going into next week. It's entirely possible it slows enough that it doesn't finish at that time. And I think it'd be really dumb for me to sit here and say it's definitely going to be tomorrow. That would be silly. I don't think you could take that for granted. So I'm going to tell you like, yes, if you measure it out, and this is a reduction that's about 1/3, a little bit more than 1/3 of this, it should be basically done by, in my opinion, by the 24th. But do I think it could be stretched out a bit and extend a little longer? Sure. And I think that'd be, again, I think it'd be really dumb for me to say, like, it's definitely going to be tomorrow. Well, I'm really more concerned about the parts. And so if this is indeed that second low, and it did make the low here, then we should be having now a push up. We are getting that. You can see it visually. It's even crossing like the same marker here, this yellow marker right there. It's really close to the same. So you're getting it. You're getting this 1 and then 2 right here. You can see the higher high right there. This is all with extended hours on, so some of this may be a grain of salt, but it is there. I mean, you can see it right there. So in theory, tomorrow, maybe even today, if this is correct, the next stage would be that you're pushing up one more time, right? You've got now a creek cross, lower creek cross. It's the same region here. You should see that push above. I don't know if it's going to come higher than the previous top. I couldn't tell you. And I don't know if it's going to even get above this blue mark, which would be lower. So that would be another change backwards. But it should be coming up to near 291. And we did leave a gap, I think, at 289, if I'm not mistaken. So it makes sense. Okay? That, to me, would just be a jump. It could be an explosive 3 or 4% move again. But it would be just a jump that would show, again, we're back testing that. We are eking out over the creek. But I noted that this time that the sell-off was quite steep. You can see it's accelerated for sure. And each time it's been a little bit faster, like in terms of like direction. This is the slowest. This one's gotten pretty steep. And then this one's really steep. So we are absolutely in an acceleration phase, in my opinion. This was on my chart, like 57-degree angle. I mean, it's not unheard of then to start seeing things get ridiculous. And this is where you start seeing like massive changes, perhaps, that you're not really necessarily prepared for. I said, I think in early October, I told the Discord, I said, it's going to get kind of bizarre. And it has. You've gotten these really huge 4% swings this way, 4% swings that way, like seemingly like in a time where we really haven't had that much volatility, at least, for a minute. We've had some pretty big swings in the past, but it's being like up and down, up and down, up and down, like every other day. It feels like that's fine. That would be normal. But you'd be getting to a point where you're going to kind of get this like final move that, in my opinion, when it goes into the last one, this is really where the tell-all would be. And I don't know for a fact it's going to go significantly lower or anything like that. I'm kind of guessing here on where that would be. If it does go down again, I'm thinking it's probably going to go ahead and go to the 265 mark and just go for it. If it continued to iterate, right, what would we have to watch out for? Well, look, man, if it iterates one more time after this, I almost don't think it's going to be the same, because at this point, based on the way this would now be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that comes down pretty low, and you'd now be below this uptrend. I don't think it's going to obey the parallel rule as much until it changes character. So what I mean is that I wouldn't even necessarily expect this to come back up to the previous parallel after that. And this could be where you finally like finish off the move. When we see this in 2024, it's really small. It's so small that you have to be on like a minute chart, and you honestly have to sit there and kind of stare at it. If I had like a 15-second chart, it might be even better, but I don't have that. You'd have to sit there and stare at each of the candles to kind of make sense of it. It does do the bottom accumulation, but it's super tiny, super, super tiny. So in our time frame, this would be one of those moments where like it probably would be noticeable to some degree, but you'd basically have this kind of moment of truth where this finally like comes down. And again, I'm just guessing, maybe November 3rd, who knows. But you'd have this kind of moment of like, oh, it's on this mark, wherever that is, okay? And it breaks below here, but then it holds support again. So it has a dip below, hits like 265. And then when it comes back up, it could have a second drop. Like it could have a phase B drop that comes kind of low. That doesn't really matter. What matters is, does it come back and close above, let's say on Friday the 30th or whatever. If it were to iterate again, does it come back and close above 265, right? Every time you drop, you're going to have to look at those levels. The other possibility is that this gets to a place where it's essentially a hot mess. So if, in theory, all that's really happening here is a creek jump followed by a 5 wave, which is kind of what it is, then it doesn't really matter what that looks like at some point. So this could be a creek jump, but then you could start a 5 wave that just starts really failing on a lot of different levels. And this is where I think things get kind of dicey, because you might be like, oh, it's going off a cliff. It won't look like it's iterating anymore, but it very well could be. Because if you think about it in terms of like what's happening, well, it just has to make a creek jump and then it can go do its thing again. As long as it's doing that creek jump in like a 5 wave, it could go down to like that low, and you could see that happen in a way that's extremely, again, like violent. Like this is the way that the stocks have gone essentially vertical or either way, you know? So just keep in mind, like once it gets to this point, I'm not going to particularly try to track it if something like this happens. I might try, but I'm not going to be like, I'm never going to be certain about it at that point because you're kind of wasting your energy trying to figure it out. Just let it go. And we know where the levels are. We know where the possibilities are. I think it's a waste of energy to try to figure out each iteration. That has happened on AMC before a few times, where the iterations are compressing and compressing and compressing and it just starts getting like super tight. So the basic pattern here of creek jump and then back test, and then you basically go into a 5 wave down. That's pretty common. That's almost exactly like what we've experienced every time. That might even be the reason why this went up again, because technically this made a higher high here. 1, 2, 3, and then 4. I mean, it's possible. They were just adding another wave in. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on it. I don't care about that much. This, if it were like kind of easy going and average and all this jazz, it'd probably be done right here, if not now. And I said earlier, if it could have been this, I genuinely meant that. Like, I think you get to a place where, you know, at some point, even looking at this, it's like at some point, even if this were to come back up, it's like this could just change right there. I would still look back at this and think that this was a auto reaction with a phase B top, because that's what it looks like, right? So each of these little pockets on these creek crosses are roughly the size of the next spring of the next iteration, because this would be roughly the size of what comes after. I don't know, it may not make complete sense. But if you think about this in terms of the 2020 model, it actually makes quite a bit of sense, because this initial bottom, it is almost the same, not identical. It's pretty similar to the structure here, right? Where you get a phase B bottom, and then you go into a, you know, whatever your spring is, and then you leave. This tends to be fairly even with that initial bottom. And I am finding that that is close to the case. So not exactly. It was pretty close. So you can see this guy right here is roughly going to be the same size as this right here. Because I think this is true. I think this is the case. This is basically the same idea. Granted, there's some differences. You know, I don't want to go like say hell-bent. It's definitely exactly the same. But there's a lot of similarities. I think it's essentially the same motif for how you accumulate, how you're traversing the lane, the range that you're in, the region that you're in. You're just kind of doing the same bounce, go up, redistribute, come down, bounce, go up, redistribute, come down, yada, yada, yada. It's very interesting to me because I went back and I looked, because I thought about it and I thought, well, maybe that is the case. You know, maybe they're pretty darn similar. And I think they are. If you go and you look at these bottoms, they're really similar in terms of, this was just another aside, I guess. They're very similar in terms of like distance traveled, right, when you jump the next creek. So it is compressing. It's definitely getting more intense. There's very little room left. I knew it when I saw it in 2024, but before it happened, I wasn't like 100% sure where it was going to be. I feel the same way now. Like I knew that it was dropping and it would need to do a spring. I didn't know exactly how low it would go, but I knew that it was in that motion. I think we're in that motion. Like we're starting those sell tests, and GME was one that, again, I'm like, yeah, it's definitely in that motion. This marker right here, and I haven't talked about this chart much at all, but this marker right here is hyper significant. And I was looking at it drop, and I thought, yeah, it's beneath a long-term uptrend here. This area that goes from June up till now looks almost identical to what we see back in April in terms of what's being hit here. It's just super stretched out. It's right on the edge of this kind of long-term resistance. There's a lot of things here that we could go into, but if it were to do a sell test, it would almost make sense to just not even go below like 20. I do think 18 is a possibility, so I'm going to leave that door open because I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility here to come back down to 18. There's a couple of reasons for that. But on the big picture, like this is where we've traditionally had bounces, so there's not really a lot to speculate on unless you think you're going to do a drop like this, the one that happened in March 2020. This is kind of the only thing that I would probably speculate on, and I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but otherwise it looks like a stretched out accordion version of what we saw in May. It's very similar, and I think I showed that on the last stream. If I didn't, then sorry. But long story short, the long-term creek trajectory here, just like AMC, we were talking about going to like 6, because that's kind of where it is. This one's up at 45, and I think, or like 45 to 50. And then even more so, I did some really bizarre stuff that I'm not going to be able to explain right now. But this right here, this marker, if you connect these two bottoms on these backups, that's really right where we are right now. And we just dropped that. And we also dropped this uptrend right here. So we dropped 2 different levels of support. They're weird levels. They're not necessarily your traditional support levels, but they're trend supports. We dropped them. It's already in a sell test. Like it's already in a strength test right now, even though it hasn't gone below bottoms. And I don't care what anyone says about that. If they say that's bad Wyckoff or something, that's fine. I think a strength test is just a strength test. You can call it whatever you want to call it. You can call it a sweep. I think it's pushing below or above a support or resistance, and I think that can be a trend at times. I wouldn't go so far as to call it like a UT or a spring, but I would say it's a strength test because that's what it looks like. And we did something like that off this top. Curiously, there's a mathematical consistency here. If you look at these 2 parallels that we have, the parallel from this bottom, which was the backup in February 2021, that then becomes the top. It's extremely interesting because there's 3 points of interest there. And I'm kind of making it a mess with this other stuff that's on here. But there's 3 specific spots where this interacts with this red line. And that middle one is actually like the center mark. And it's really bizarre because that middle right there is the 27.22. And we gapped down off of that just recently. This marker right here that we use as a drop ledge way back in December 2022, if you connect it, it connects right through these 2 peaks, and it runs parallel to the bottom. So it is a parallel structure. It is a trend structure. I use that same marker here. I made another version of it, right? I use that same marker here, and not surprisingly, it interacts with the past quite neatly, and these drop ledges here. I mean, these are the same. They kind of look weird, I guess, but they actually hit the same marks like almost every time. I'm ignoring the really deep low, but basically you're hitting like these same notes when you're coming through here, and I don't have the top one, but it is right there. Like it's the same mark. If you try this line up, that's the same top that this has back here. So they are the same. Again, I'm not going to go into every little detail, but this is the same structure then in how it's interacting with that bottom. And you even have, again, off this red line going into this low here, and then that breakout. Well, I went back and looked at this, and it has that buy up that happened at 16. There's a similar motion that happened here on a big picture. But I was more curious about like where that is in relation to everything else on the big picture, and I thought this was pretty bizarre. If you go back and then you measure this top to bottom, the middle, and it doesn't strike me as that weird until I start looking at all of this stuff together. The middle actually ends up being really close to like 25, the center of this whole move. And that's very similar to where this was established. And that gap down happens right here, like 2560, December 2022. Again, off that same line. So it's almost as if all of this is in preparation for this big retracement that's going to happen. And ultimately, this is a massive, you can see it, hopefully, that's a massive wave, up, down, up again. So the good news would be that if you could replicate that same concept, you should be able to identify where it's going to go up again. The bad news might be that, well, I guess it could have already technically done that. You know, it's possible. If you think that that's what happened back here in May. I do not, for a number of reasons, think that's what happened. I don't want to get into, again, too much of that, but I actually think that this is just a really violent version of the same thing that happened here. So you have this, it's violent because it's more horizontal. Let's just put it that way. This is actually a lot stronger. So after this second push-up, right, there's this high range, and then you come back down, and this is really just interacting with that mark before you start pushing low, and you come back to this lower area. This is all interacting with that red line that I just talked about, the one that connects the bottom and the top. You see the same thing here, but I don't think that this broke, I don't think it broke it until February. I don't think it was back here in October. It may look like it breaks down there, and you might be thinking, well, if it does, then this is completely different, and you're not wrong. But the thing is they established this, and you notice that this guy, when it comes back up, it goes back and retests that. And I think it's just being established on like a different angle. So I don't believe that that's actually right. I think this is it right here. And I went through and looked at it a few different ways. And I think this motion, even though it's extremely high, right, and this one didn't ever come up that high, I think this is actually the accurate motion. Part of the reason for that is because when we did that wave, this ended up being like almost 1-to-1. And I remember thinking that wave worked really, really well. We estimated where this was going to go to 28 and then up to 34 in May. We were using this wave right here over the center mark that was established here. The reason I find this to be curious is because, again, this is the same line, same parallel, but instead it's smaller, which again implies iteration, okay? And that would suggest that you actually have a middle right here, and it's the same middle, which is kind of freaky. So it's actually iterating like on the same mark. It's exactly the same. You know, it's the same exact zone. It's that 27, 22 down to 26, or excuse me, 25, 60. It's the same exact region. This just breaks way high above it. It does. It looks crazy, and that could definitely be a big change. I'm not going to talk about every single change of character here, but that could absolutely be a big change, right? And I noted this in the Discord group, although I did not explain it in the Discord group. I said that I thought that that was the middle, and that therefore this should be the end on October 22nd, and it looks like the 23rd right there, but I don't know if that's just because of I'm in the daily instead of the 4 hour or something. I don't know. Or maybe I picked the wrong wick. Who cares? It's roughly October 22nd because this motion down should be through the middle, should be your finale. Like it should be the final motion. I went into length in this video that I made that I didn't post, but it was basically a measurement from June to February to now. And if you measure from June 7th to February 14th to now, you get October 22nd. And the reason I thought that was important was because on the other chart that I did, that would have been like a pinnacle S-curve down, right? So you would have had like a big S-curve down, and that's a similar, if not the same measurement that you get here on this S-curve down, not including the top, but that secondary reaction. That S-curve down gives you the measurement to the bottom. So I had estimated it. It's weird that we're getting green right now, but I had estimated it to be the 22nd. And you can go check me on the Discord about that. I didn't think it was going to be like obvious, but I said that it really would have terminated on the 22nd and you wouldn't have any more after that. It should be as low as it goes. I'm not convinced it's going to happen, but we'll see. It needs to get back above 2450, and then we'll definitely be in a it's a long freaking video. It's really long. It's like an hour and 30 minutes. I tried to cut it into pieces, and then I was like, you know what? I don't think anyone's going to watch this. So that's actually what I said. I don't think anyone's going to watch this. So I was like, I'm not going to post it. I have low self-esteem with videos. I'm like, this ain't going to work out. Like, no one's going to watch this crap. So I was like, I'm not going to post an hour and 30-minute video. I tried to split it into AMC. Was only about 35 minutes of that. So I thought maybe if I split it. And I spent a really long time on GME, but a lot of it was kind of rambling. It's about this stuff, though. So anyways, the point being is that that would have been like a termination point. It should be like right here. I mean, we're at that point. And it's the same with AMC. It's kind of like you're kind of out of room. Like if it's going to change character, it could basically do it like right now. I don't know if you guys remember, but in May 2024, when GME went up, it had already like been up. It would already have been like here, for example. This is where GME would be breaking out because it had jumped the creek. So to give you a comparison, if GameStop were to start running up and it ran up to like 28, 29 and consolidated, and AMC just went up and then came back down into a spring, that would be exactly the same way that it broke in May 2024. That's just an example. GameStop already jumped the creek. It's really important that you guys remember that because I think about that all the time, and I'm like, this is where it was in May 8th. It was already up here. Look at that gap down too. Like it was already right there at that gap down, consolidating, and that's right where the creek was. It's exactly the same right now. So if you look at where that gap is here and where that creek is, that's where it's at. If you look at where the gap is right here, it needs to be like a little bit higher for sure, but that's where the creek is. There's no question about it. It's right there. So like the same thing would be if this runs up to 29 and AMC is kind of left behind, and down here around the creek, or excuse me, the bottom, I would not panic. That to me would be a really strong signal that this is probably about to go, because that's the exact same way that we broke out in 2024. AMC likes to do the spring. It's also the same way we broke out in 2020. GME was already marking up when, if you don't recall, GME was already marking up when AMC was going low. If you look at where they were when the big moves happened, this is where GameStop was. It was way above. It had already left. This is September, and AMC, if you guys don't know, AMC during September went down into its spring. Like, by the time January rolls around, AMC is at an all-time low. So, like, there's a very, very strong difference in how the stocks have moved. AMC has largely gone for springs or low liquidity sweeps, whereas GME has been buying out. So I'm not saying it has to be that way every time, but thematically, like behavior-wise, it would not be unexpected. So anyways, I was looking at this and I thought, well, if this is basically the same on the whole, then this area right here, which is your kind of breakdown zone, would be very much similar to this, albeit it'd have to be smaller. And I don't really know how to draw that other than just to say it's there. But I do know that the way this is interacting with this red mark, if you look again, is the same. Like you can see the walk down here, and you can see that walk down, albeit it is extreme because this comes higher, and I think that's important. It could be a signal for some folks that that's maybe not as bullish as it could be. And then look at the area that it's chilling out in. It's the same exact parallel that we were running in here when this broke out and ran, which is the same parallel that we were running in here as well, this area. So I don't find that to be a coincidence. And the fact that we are seeing the same thing on AMC with the iterations, see this is like going downward into this lower motion. The fact that we're seeing the same thing here, but it's flat, I just think that's just the nature of the charts. GameStop has always been more vertical, upright, if you want. And AMC's been down and flat. I mean, that's just the way they are. So I see this as kind of like the same as thinking about the AMC floor in some ways, like where this is like the previous bottom and this is now like kind of dipping through. And I mean, yeah, it's really close to the same. So, and they're both trading like on these kind of lower supports in this case, it's rising. The only thing I'd be concerned about with GameStop is some kind of like a fake out that hits like 24 and then drops really hard to either 20 or 18. But on the whole, if I'm looking at this and I'm thinking that this could end up going quite far, one of the reasons I considered 18 so much is because if you look at where the top marker is here, it's not that high. It's only 42. If it just went straight up as the crow flies, you would expect it to get there, but you'd expect it to get there as it meets, just in theory, as it meets this guy, right? Which really wouldn't happen until January. So there's a little bit of a confusion there because it's like, well, then it shouldn't be there till January if you got this right, Maybe I'm off a bit. It's possible. Maybe this is supposed to be like, I don't know how this would work, but maybe it's supposed to be like here instead. I don't know for sure. That's a tough one. I think I got it right, but it would, in theory, be more likely to be there in January. So you're kind of wondering, well, then what the heck is this? Is this like a halfway point? Yada, yada, yada. I don't know. The other thing is like, this was a roughly 50-50 across that middle. And if you look at where the middle is here, if the middle is 27 again, if it is indeed the exact same middle, this isn't really giving us a lot of confidence this is going to go very high. This would only be like 33, right? However, I did measure to the top, and then I measured down to where the middle was. I thought it was pretty interesting because it goes basically down to that 15 to 16 area back here, which most people were thinking that's where it was going to go. I'm not sure if any of that really matters that much because at the end of the day, I'm not going to say it's like game breaking kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, like, I think what matters more is the overall like wave impression that you have. I don't think that these little specific numbers are going to be make or break. It would be nice if they worked perfectly, but it would be something of a, let's just say something not too unusual if this isn't actually parallel, if it were, for example, this is just an example, but like if this, for example, were higher like this, then it would actually change everything, right? So if instead of you considering this the middle, instead you're considering 28 or 29 the middle, and then this is actually just coming back and rechecking it, this changes dramatically versus being like lower, and it also changes dramatically. So I'm making a lot of statements based on what I think is accurate about this being like a parallel mark compared to the previous, but it doesn't change much, or it doesn't, I guess what I'm trying to say is it wouldn't faze me if I'm a little off and it ends up that this wasn't actually right. Maybe it's actually higher and it is going to hit right here in November, before earnings. And it's because of the fact that this isn't actually parallel, right? I don't know. That's not something I'm going to be able to predict. So all I can do right now is suggest that, we could use one more method. This is what I had done previously, which is bottom to hook. This is pretty darn close. If you use like bottom here to where the hook is, that's pretty darn close to the angle. And that's the only other thing I could maybe do differently. That would definitely change it. Because if you use bottom here instead of this, but you use bottom here to where that hook is, this gives you a much more, and I guess it would be right. I Can't even really see it. This is a hard one to do. I can't see where it is. I think it's there. That's really steep. Tomorrow, like October 28th. But like there it is, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Like I could be wrong. It may not be that it's a parallel. It may be that, I mean, it is parallel for sure, but it may be more about these two marks. That's the only other thing I can do.